You can't be serious, I whispered, staring at the ring box she was holding like a trophy. My daughter-in-law, Kristen, smirked as she slipped my late mother's emerald ring onto her finger, right there in front of my entire family at my granddaughter's christening. Oh, I'm very serious, she said sweetly. This ring was left for the next generation. I am the next generation now, aren't I? I felt my breath catch my skin, flush hot with disbelief, and my fingers tremble against the side of the pew. It wasn't just the ring, my mother's ring, it was what it represented. My daughter-in-law had claimed it declared it hers, with the entitlement of someone who truly believed I no longer had a place in the family my blood built. And no one, not my son, not my daughter, not even the priest who'd just finished blessing my first great-grandchild, said a word. If you've ever seen someone erased from their own family with a single smile, I said under my breath, stay until the end of this story. And leave a comment with your city. Let me know if something like this is happening near you. And please, subscribe if you still believe people like me deserve a voice. I held my tongue as Kristen turned to the crowd of family and friends and lifted her hand like she was modeling for a magazine. It fits perfectly, doesn't it? She said, beaming. Meant to be. Meant to be. That ring wasn't some fashion accessory. My mother had worn it every day for 46 years. When her arthritis twisted her hands too badly to keep it on, she gave it to me with tears in her eyes and said, "This is for you, not for a vault, not for a will, for your hand. You wear it until you're gone, then you give it to the one who remembers where it came from." And now it was on Kristen's hand. Kristen, who once said emeralds were a bit tacky. Kristen, who had never asked me about my mother, never once mentioned her by name. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the ring off her finger and tell the whole gathering what she'd done. But instead, I sat in silence. Like a museum statue, everyone had forgotten, positioned in the front row, wearing the same expression I had worn when my husband died 3 years ago. Stoic, absent, out of place. They had set me apart from the rest of the family today. My name wasn't even on the program. And now, my daughter-in-law had stolen the last tangible thing that tied me to my mother. It wasn't about the stone. It was about the theft of meaning, the public rewrite of history, claiming that the ring was meant for her. And no one had stopped her. After the ceremony, they moved on to cake. Kristen made a show of feeding the baby mashed banana while showing off the ring to her girlfriends. My son Ethan was busy chatting with Kristen's uncle about golf, avoiding my gaze like I was radioactive. My daughter Lisa gave me a brief nod when we made eye contact, but she quickly turned away. I stood at the edge of the patio alone. People brushed past me. A woman I'd known for years patted my shoulder and said, "Oh, how sweet of you to pass the ring down already." I blinked at her. "I didn't," I said softly. But she was already gone. By mid-afternoon, the stories had shifted. "I always knew Kristen would get it someday," someone said. "Did you hear her say Margaret left it for the new matriarch?" another chimed in. Margaret, that was my mother. Kristen had used her first name like she knew her, like she had earned it. I found myself sitting in the downstairs guest room, the one Kristen had redone last year without asking. The floral wallpaper I loved was gone. The antique dresser replaced by sleek modern cabinets. We needed more space for the baby's stuff, Kristen had said. But now I knew. Bit by bit, she had been wiping away my presence. When Ethan came in to check on me, he barely made eye contact. "Are you all right, Mum?" he asked, holding the doorknob like he couldn't wait to leave. I gestured toward the backyard. "Did you see the ring?" He hesitated. "Yeah. And," he sighed, "look, it's just a ring." Kristen said your mother told her she wanted it passed down to whoever would be raising the next generation. "It's a tradition thing. Don't make a scene." I stared at him, my own son. My mother never spoke to Kristen. She died before we even met her. Ethan looked uncomfortable. Maybe she meant it symbolically. I don't know. Just let's not start anything today. Let's not start anything today. The words circled my brain like a curse. Later that evening, Kristen uploaded a picture on Facebook, her hand with the ring cradling the baby's foot. Caption 3: Generations of Love. The comments exploded with praise. People called it beautiful, timeless, a moment that should be framed. And there I was, the actual daughter of the woman who wore that ring for nearly half a century, completely erased. By midnight, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house, my bones aching in a way they hadn't since the week after my husband's funeral. I ended up in the attic, searching through the old boxes of letters and photos I'd stored after my mother's passing. I needed something, proof, words, handwriting, anything, to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that the ring was truly mine, and that Kristen had no right to touch it, let alone parade it like a family heirloom she had earned. I opened a box marked Mom, final year. Inside were letters, cards, her prayer book, and a small envelope. It was yellowed brittle at the edges, sealed with a faded wax stamp. Inside it was a folded note. To Margaret's daughter, it read in shaky cursive, "You've taken care of me longer than I deserved. I want you to keep the ring. Not for show, but for strength. It belongs to your hand, not to fashion. If someone tries to take it, don't let them rewrite our story." I wept quietly. That's what it was. Kristen wasn't stealing jewelry. She was stealing legacy, memory, identity. And she was doing it so publicly, so cleanly, that even the family had accepted the new narrative without a second thought. But not me. Not yet. Have you ever seen someone twist your family's history right in front of your eyes? Have you ever watched people cheer for it while you stood invisible? Tell me below, because I need to know I'm not alone. That night, I placed the letter inside a new envelope and locked it in my nightstand drawer. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew one thing. Kristen wasn't done, and neither was I. The next morning, something was off. I woke up to the sound of laughter downstairs, a strange sound in what used to be a quiet home. I stepped out of my room expecting to smell coffee or hear Ethan's usual morning clatter in the kitchen. Instead, I saw Kristen coming up the stairs with a load of neatly folded towels and a satisfied smile on her face. "Oh, you're awake," she chirped. "Good. I moved your things?" I blinked. "Moved my things?" "To the sunroom. I figured you'd prefer more sunlight and, fewer stairs." I followed her down before I even had time to process. The sunroom, once my space for reading, reflection, and orchids, had been hastily transformed. My clothes were folded onto open shelving. My bed, no longer a real bed, was now a daybed pushed up against the windows. No closet, no privacy, no door. "Where's my dresser?" I asked, throat tightening. "In the garage," she said with a smile, as if this were all part of some gracious redecorating effort. "The baby will be sleeping upstairs now. You understand, it's just more convenient. More convenient for her." I stood there, stunned, looking at my mother's old quilt draped awkwardly over a mattress that didn't belong here. I'd lived in this house longer than either of them, raised my children here, and now I was reallocated. That afternoon, I noticed the locks had changed. Not the front door, but the medicine cabinet in the hallway bathroom. I reached for my small bottle of arthritis medication, only to find a child safety latch where there had never been one. I asked Kristen about it. She raised her eyebrows. "Just a precaution. You know now that the baby's crawling. The baby is 6 months old. Well, early preparation is responsible parenting," she said coolly, then offered a rehearsed smile. Ethan didn't say a word. Over the next few days, the house itself began to reject me. My armchair vanished from the living room. We needed more space for the playpen, Kristen had explained. The family calendar on the fridge, where I used to jot down doctor's appointments and birthdays, was replaced with a minimalist app-controlled tablet that Kristen synced only with her phone and Ethan's. I no longer existed in their schedule. At dinner, I sat quietly, a ghost in the room. Kristen fed the baby organic mush and launched into long rants about sleep training and new parenting philosophies, none of which included me. Ethan listened. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he scrolled his phone, but he never once looked in my direction for help, support, or even acknowledgement. I tried. I offered to babysit so they could get some rest. Kristen smiled tightly. Thank you, but I've already arranged help. My cousin Emily's taking over Mondays and Wednesdays. You should rest. Rest. A passive verb, a quiet dismissal. Then came the night I found my mail already opened. Kristen had opened an envelope addressed to me from the Social Security Administration. I thought it was just insurance stuff, she said, waving it off. It's not like I read anything private. That same week, I discovered my phone contacts had changed. My landline's caller ID no longer displayed Lisa's name, just an unknown number. I asked her about it the next day when I saw her at the grocery store. She blinked. Kristen said you changed numbers. I texted you last week and never heard back. I didn't get any texts. She frowned. Are you sure you're not just overwhelmed? Overwhelmed. They were all starting to use the same words. Quiet words. Words that placed blame on my fragility, not their calculated detachment. But the most painful shift was the baby. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Kristen would always have her on her hip when I entered the room, cooing, say hi to Grandma, oh, she's sleepy, then walking away. Or she'd insist the baby needed quiet time just as I reached for her. Eventually, I stopped trying. Then one morning, I walked past the nursery and heard Kristen's voice on the phone. Her tone was clipped direct. No, she's not watching her alone. She forgets things. You didn't see what happened with the formula. I stopped breathing. I know she means well, but I can't have her confusing the bottles, or yes, I know. But this is about safety. I stepped back quietly and returned to the sunroom. There had been no formula incident, nothing even close. Kristen had begun spinning a narrative and clearly spreading it. That night when Ethan came home, I brought it up. Do you think I'm becoming forgetful? He hesitated. No. No, Mom. But you have to admit you've seemed a little out of it lately. Maybe it's the stress. You've had a lot of change. I stared at him. Change that I never asked for, that I wasn't consulted about. He sighed. Kristen's just trying to help. She's adjusting too. Try to meet her halfway. Halfway to what erasure? That weekend, Kristen hosted a Mothers of Under One playdate in our living room. 6 women with yoga pants and stainless steel water bottles took over the space. The baby's toys filled the floor. I heard one of them say, "This place is so zen." I love how Kristen designed it. So uncluttered, uncluttered. That used to be my living room. The mantel used to hold photos of Ethan's first day of school, Lisa's graduation, our family vacation in Yellowstone. Now the wall was bare, except for a minimalist canvas that read, "Energy flows, where attention goes." I went upstairs to the attic again that night. I opened my mother's trunk and held her prayer book in my lap. The pages smelled like memory lavender and dust. I clutched the envelope I had found the week before. The handwriting. The history. The reminder that someone had trusted me, loved me, left something for me. Not for the next generation, but for me. It wasn't just about the ring anymore. It was about my identity being systematically replaced by someone who wanted my position quietly, politely, efficiently. They hadn't screamed. They hadn't fought. They hadn't even asked me to leave. They had simply stopped needing me. Have you ever felt someone rewrite the script of your life while you're still living it? Have you ever watched your role shrink day by day without anyone saying it out loud? Tell me in the comments. I want others to see how silence can be louder than words. That night I went to bed early, or tried to. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up to the glow of the hallway light. I tiptoed out and saw Kristen standing at the door to the nursery rocking the baby. She didn't see me, but I heard her whispering softly. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said. This house will be all yours one day, just like Grandma wanted. Grandma, not me. Her voice was so quiet, I might have imagined it. But I knew in my bones I had just heard Kristen referring to herself. That was the moment I realized she hadn't just taken the ring. She was taking my title too, and the rest of the family was letting her. The air in the house felt different now. Thicker, heavier, like I was breathing through a filter I hadn't noticed before. Days blurred together, each one slightly colder than the last, not in temperature, but in tone. There were no fights, no shouting matches, no accusations, just silence. A deep, deliberate silence that followed me wherever I went. I hadn't held my granddaughter in nearly 2 weeks. Each time I offered, Kristen would give me a rehearsed smile and say, "She just went down for a nap," or "She's overstimulated, maybe next time." It didn't matter if the baby was wide awake in her swing or gurgling happily in someone else's arms. When it came to me, there was always a reason, an excuse, a barrier. I tried to speak to Ethan again. He was in the garage fiddling with tools that had once belonged to his father. I walked in, slowly watching him tighten something with unnecessary force. "Can we talk?" I asked. He looked up, surprised. "Sure." "I feel like I'm being pushed out." He let out a breath. "Mom, I mean it." Kristen moved me into the sunroom. "I'm not allowed to watch the baby alone. My things are disappearing." "She's not trying to push you out." He interrupted, his tone exasperated. "She's just trying to organize the house in a way that works for our family now." Our family. As if I weren't part of that definition. And what am I, Ethan, a guest? You're overthinking it. But I wasn't. I was watching it happen. Watching my identity disassemble piece by piece, like furniture being quietly dismantled in the middle of the night. That evening, Lisa came by for a brief visit. She brought a small bag of baby clothes from a boutique and handed them to Kristen, who accepted them with a glowing thank you. I waited, hoping Lisa would come sit with me in the sunroom. She didn't. Instead, she asked Kristen if she could see her ring again. Kristen, beaming, lifted her hand and extended her fingers like a model. Lisa gasped. "It looks even better than I remembered." "It's so good that Grandma left it for you. You wear it so well." I stood just outside the kitchen archway, invisible. I had raised Lisa, sat through hours of her piano recitals, sewed her Halloween costumes by hand. And now she looked at Kristen as the new matriarch, the new heir, as if my blood didn't course through her own veins. That night, I reached out to my sister in Oregon. We hadn't spoken in a while, life had gotten in the way, as it often does with siblings, but I needed someone. Anyone. I called 3 times. No answer. Later, I received a text. "Kristen said you've been unwell." I didn't want to intrude. "Maybe rest for now and we'll catch up next week." Kristen had been talking to her. Without my knowledge, painting a picture of me as, what unstable ill. I texted back immediately, trying to sound light. "I'm okay. Let's catch up tomorrow." No response. The next morning, my doctor's office called. They had received a request to update my medical proxy and emergency contact. It had Kristen's name on it. I never made that request. When I asked Kristen, she tilted her head and said, "You mentioned something about updating your documents after Dad passed. I figured I'd help you out. You can always change it if you want." She'd submitted paperwork under my name. No permission, no discussion. I called the office back and revoked the change. But a creeping panic had already taken root. Kristen wasn't just rearranging the house, she was rearranging my life, filing forms, rewriting relationships. One afternoon, I overheard the neighbors talking on the sidewalk. I wasn't spying, I had stepped out to collect mail and caught a few words. "I didn't realize Kristen's mother-in-law moved away," one of them said. "She didn't move." "She's still living there," I think the other replied. "Well, Kristen told me they're mostly on their own now, that her husband's mother is no longer involved." No longer involved. I was sitting in the sunroom 20 feet from where those words were spoken, holding the envelope with my mother's handwriting inside. I stared down at it, wondering if maybe I was disappearing not from life, but from record. I tried calling a few friends. Voicemail. No one picked up. Kristen had hosted a ladies' brunch last Sunday and hadn't invited me. I found out because I saw photos on her Instagram story. My book club, my neighbors, even the church ladies, everyone had come, but no one had called me. Have you ever been cut out of something you used to lead, watched a circle you helped build close in on itself and leave you outside? If that's ever happened to you even once, I hope you'll write about it below. Someone else out there might need to hear they're not the only one. I began writing in a notebook. At first, it was just lists: what changed, what disappeared, what Kristen had said. But then it turned into something else: documentation, dates, times, words, expressions, reactions. It made me feel grounded, real, seen. One morning, Kristen walked past the sunroom and saw me writing. Journaling now, she asked, her voice bright. Something like that. She didn't ask to read it. But later that night, I noticed my notebook had been moved, just slightly. The page marker was wrong. The pen was dry, as if someone had tested it. That same day, Ethan's tone shifted again. I think maybe you're under more stress than you realize, he said carefully. Kristen and I have been talking. Maybe it's time we look at some kind of support, someone who can come in during the day, help out. You know, to make things easier. Easier for who I asked. He didn't answer. I walked out into the garden that evening. The flowers I had tended for decades were overgrown, the irrigation system having failed sometime in the spring. Kristen had insisted on replacing it with something smart, an app-controlled system that she'd never activated. Now weeds crawled over the hydrangeas. Everything I had nurtured was fading. Even the baby. I hadn't heard her laugh in days. I used to be the one who made her giggle with silly songs and soft brushes across her belly. Now I barely saw her. I walked back into the house and heard laughter coming from the nursery. Kristen and Ethan. The baby squealing. I stood outside the door and felt like a stranger. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. I turned and walked back to the sunroom. My bed, my shelf, my corner of the house. I sat down and realized I was no longer living in a home. I was occupying a space temporarily, conditionally, until it was no longer convenient. That night I had a dream. In it, I was walking through a museum. The walls were covered in portraits, photos of Kristen holding the baby Kristen at her wedding. Kristen smiling in front of our fireplace. There was no photo of me. None of Ethan as a child. None of my mother. Just Kristen. A plaque under each frame read, "Family Matriarch. Inherited everything." When I woke up, my pillow was wet with tears. The next morning, I opened the drawer to check on my notebook. It was gone. It was the phone call I didn't expect that broke the illusion. The morning had started like most others. Kristen made sure I was settled in the sunroom with tea and a magazine, even though I hadn't asked for either. The baby was laughing somewhere in the back of the house, and Ethan was already gone to work. I had barely touched my toast when the house phone rang, a sound that had become increasingly rare since Kristen insisted on using only cell phones. I picked it up, expecting a telemarketer or maybe one of the church ladies. But it was Dr. Kaplan, my neurologist. "Hi, Margaret. I just wanted to confirm your rescheduled evaluation for next week." I paused. "I'm sorry. The memory assessment. Kristen called last week and said you'd had some lapses. She wanted to make sure we caught any cognitive decline early." I nearly dropped the phone. I didn't schedule that. There was a beat of silence. "Oh, she said you'd talked about it." I was trembling now, gripping the phone with both hands. "No, I never agreed to any evaluation." Dr. Kaplan was polite, professional. But I could tell she was uncomfortable. "Would you like me to cancel it?" "Yes," I said. "Cancel it. And put a note in my file that no appointments are to be made under my name unless I speak to you directly. Not Kristen. Me." Understood. When I hung up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Kristen had tried to schedule a neurological exam behind my back. And what would she have done with the results? What story was she preparing to tell? I sat back on the daybed and stared at the ceiling. I'd spent the past few weeks convincing myself I was just being pushed aside, that maybe this was about space, or parenting preferences, or modern family boundaries. But it wasn't. It was about removal. Quiet, strategic removal. I needed to get out, just for a walk, to breathe. I grabbed my coat and left through the back door so Kristen wouldn't hear me. I walked 3 blocks to the pharmacy to refill a prescription, one I normally ordered online, but I needed to see someone. Anyone. At the counter, a young technician greeted me with a familiar smile. Her name tag read, Yasmin, and she'd helped me for years. Mrs. Callahan, she said brightly. We already sent your refill yesterday. No, I said. I didn't request it. Her brow furrowed. It was picked up. Signed for, actually. I stared at her. By who? She tapped at the screen. Kristen Callahan. Of course. Of course. Kristen had picked up my medication, my name, my records, my dosage, without asking, without telling. I walked home slower than I'd come each step, waited with disbelief. The sidewalk blurred under my feet. I didn't realize how far I'd gone until a voice behind me said, Mrs. Callahan. I turned. It was Maria, the housekeeper we'd let go 3 years ago after my husband passed. She looked older, thinner, but her warm eyes hadn't changed. Maria, I gasped. She hugged me tight. I thought that was you. I was just visiting my niece around the corner. How are you? I wanted to say fine, but I couldn't. She pulled back and looked at me closely. You don't look fine, I told her. Not everything, but enough. The room, the baby, the ring, the doctor, the pharmacy, the silence. She listened. Every word. Then she said, Kristen never liked you in that house. Not really. Do you remember the time she asked me to move all your things from the master bedroom without telling you? She said it was for spring cleaning. I blinked. What? I refused. I told her I'd never move your things without you being there. She fired me the next week. I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought you knew, Maria added gently. But maybe she wanted it that way. We sat on the bus bench for nearly an hour. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go back to a place where the walls knew her better than they knew me. When I finally did return, Kristen was waiting on the porch. There you are, she said, masking her irritation with forced concern. I was about to call someone. You should leave a note if you're going out. I walked past her without answering. That evening, I opened my nightstand and took out my mother's letter again. The words felt heavier now. If someone tries to take it, don't let them rewrite our story. Kristen wasn't just rewriting the story. She was submitting a whole new manuscript. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how many other things she'd changed. Documents, perceptions, relationships. How many people thought I was slipping? How many believed the story Kristen was writing? In the morning, I checked the file drawer in the hallway cabinet. Our deed. The trust. The will. Pages were missing. I froze. I'd kept copies of everything originals in a lockbox, copies here. The envelope labeled Joint Trust Agreement, Callahan 1993, was gone. I knocked on Ethan's study door. Do you know where the trust papers are? He looked up from his laptop. What papers? Our original estate trust. Didn't Kristen put all that in the safe? I stared. We don't have a safe. He paused. She said you both went through everything after Dad died. No, we didn't. He frowned. Maybe I misunderstood. I turned to leave. So did I. That night, Kristen left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I don't know what drove me to check. Desperation, survival. There in her browser history was a page titled How to Gain Conservatorship of a Family Member in California. I felt like I was falling through the floor. Have you ever discovered something that made everything else make sense and terrified you at the same time? A piece of truth so sharp, It cut through weeks of confusion. If so, please leave a comment. I need to know how you handled it, what you did, what I should do. I printed the page. I took photos of the URL, the timestamp. I began collecting more, and for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. But I wasn't prepared for how fast she would strike. The next morning, Kristen greeted me with unusual warmth. She offered to make breakfast, brewed coffee, and even asked about my orchids. I didn't trust it. Mid-morning, Ethan called from work. Mom, Kristen told me you're planning to change your healthcare proxy. Is everything okay? My chest tightened. I told you Kristen changed it without my knowledge. I'm fixing it. She's worried. She says you've been suspicious. She said you're acting different. She's rewriting reality, I said. There was silence on the other end. Let's talk when I get home. But he didn't come home that night. Kristen said he had a work dinner. But I knew. Something was happening behind the scenes. I didn't sleep. I just waited. Because now I understood. Kristen wasn't just trying to control me. She was trying to replace me, and I had no idea how far she'd already gotten. I stopped hoping things would return to normal. By the time the 4th week passed, I knew Kristen wasn't operating on impulse. Everything she had done, removing my chair, isolating me from my granddaughter, whispering about memory lapses, submitting paperwork under my name, was part of a plan. A quiet, layered, carefully timed plan. And like most predators, she smiled while circling. But what she hadn't realized was that I had stopped sleeping. I wasn't staying up out of fear anymore. I was staying up out of purpose. Every night after the house went still, after Ethan's footsteps faded and the baby's sound machine began humming, I would rise from the daybed in the sunroom and begin to document. I wrote by hand in a spiral notebook, a fresh one that I kept zipped in a tote bag under the cushion. Kristen had already found the first journal. I'd kept the one she accidentally misplaced. So this time, I recorded everything on paper and took photos with a disposable camera I found in the back of the hallway drawer. I wrote down dates, snippets of dialogue, observations, behavior. I recorded the page numbers of books she'd rearranged on the family shelves. One day, a photo of my wedding had disappeared. The next, a ceramic dog I'd bought in France with my late husband was boxed and moved to the attic. She was scrubbing me from the house, one memory at a time. But I began collecting. It started with a voicemail. I'd forgotten to unplug the landline, and one morning I heard the blinking light. I pressed play. It was from Kristen, not to me. To Ethan. Just remember to ask Dr. Patel if she'll sign the report herself, she said. If it looks like it's coming from me, the court won't consider it unbiased. And don't forget to delete this message after. My stomach clenched. I immediately pulled out my old tape recorder from the bookshelf, a relic my husband used to use for dictating thoughts. I played the message back and held the recorder up to the speaker, capturing it. I labeled the tape with the date. That was the beginning. Next came the receipts. I found them tucked behind the microwave, where Kristen often stashed things before tossing them in the trash. She didn't realize I still cleaned my own space. She probably assumed I wouldn't notice. But I saw the bag from Greenwell Legal Consultants, 2 notarized documents, and 1 invoice for general estate reallocation preparation. I took photos before putting everything back exactly as it had been. The next day, I visited the library while Kristen was at her prenatal yoga class. Yes, she was pregnant again. That explained the sudden push to rearrange the house. More space, more quiet, more rest for her, and less of me. I asked the librarian for help accessing public court records. She taught me how to use the database. I searched my own name. Nothing yet, but then I searched Kristen's. 2 applications filed under preliminary conservatorship inquiries. Nothing formal, just intent to establish. 1 form listed me as the subject. She hadn't filed the petition yet, but she was preparing the court to receive it. She was positioning me as incompetent. I printed the screen, paid the 50 cents, and walked out into the afternoon light shaking. That night, I met with someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Miriam. She was a retired social worker who used to live across the street, before Kristen convinced Ethan to let the hedges grow taller to increase privacy. We hadn't spoken since the funeral, but I knew I needed someone I could trust. Over coffee at her place, I told her everything. I showed her the voicemail, the printed court notice, the receipts, the letter from my mother. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, her eyes were wet. "She's trying to erase you," she said softly, "and she's doing it legally." "I'm documenting," I said. "But I don't know if it's enough." "Let me help," she replied. "I know people in adult protection services. I'm not saying to accuse anyone yet, but we can make sure your rights are protected." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. That weekend, I bought a small USB voice recorder. I kept it in the pocket of my cardigan, turned on whenever Kristen was in the room. One evening, she entered the sunroom with a tray of sliced apples and a tea I hadn't asked for. "I know you're upset about all the changes," she said, setting it down, "but you have to understand. This house has to evolve. You're not the center anymore." I said nothing. She took a deep breath, then added, "You had your turn. Now it's mine. The family's mine now." She left without waiting for a response. The recorder caught every word. "Have you ever been told, directly or indirectly, that your time is up? That you no longer belong in the very place you helped build? That your existence is now inconvenient? Tell me below. I want to hear from others who have been made to feel disposable, because silence only helps the ones who are doing the erasing." The next day I called Lisa, my daughter. She had been distant, yes, but I hadn't yet told her everything. I asked to meet in person, not at the house. She agreed. We sat at a small cafe, and I laid out the evidence one by one: the voicemail, the receipts, the printed court records, the conservatorship forms. I even showed her a printed transcript of the sunroom conversation. Lisa stared, stunned. I had no idea. "She's been conditioning everyone," I said quietly. "You, Ethan, the neighbors, the doctors. Everyone." Lisa covered her mouth. "Mom, this is serious. We have to do something." "I am. You can't do this alone." "I'm not anymore." Later that evening, when I returned home, Kristen was waiting in the hallway. "Lisa's been texting Ethan," she said flatly. I said nothing. "She's confused. She doesn't understand the full situation." "I think she does." Kristen's lips thinned. "You're making things difficult for no reason. You're creating conflict." "No," I said, my voice clear. "I'm preserving truth." That night, I placed all the evidence in a new folder. I labeled it Kristen, Timeline. I wrote a summary of events. I listed names, dates, witnesses. I made 3 copies. One stayed with me, one went to Miriam, and the third would go to someone unexpected. But I hadn't decided who yet, because I hadn't expected what would happen next. The following morning, I reached into the drawer where I had hidden my mother's letter, and it was gone. They always say you marry the man, not the family. What they don't tell you is sometimes the family refuses to let you marry him entirely. From the moment Ethan introduced me to his mother, I knew. She wasn't going to make room for me. Not really. She smiled politely. She offered tea. She asked about my job. But everything in her posture said, "You're a visitor here. You may love him, but I made him." At first I tried. I brought her flowers, listened to her stories about how Ethan hated carrots, how he once cried when a bird flew into his room. I laughed, played along. I offered to help around the house. But she never let go of the reins. Every holiday, every decision, every minor moment, she inserted herself. She expected to be the first to hold the baby, the final voice in every plan, the unchallenged matriarch. And Ethan, he didn't even notice, because to him it was normal. That house had always revolved around her. It wasn't always like this for me. My mother wasn't the kind of woman who smiled and offered tea. She was sharp, loud, and never present. My childhood was split between hiding in my room and explaining her outbursts to teachers. She burned bridges like they were kindling. When I was 12, I spent an entire summer living at a friend's house because my mother had needed space. I learned early that being invisible was safer than being noticed. But I also learned how to watch people, study them, learn their patterns, their weak spots. When I met Ethan, I thought I'd finally escaped all of that. He was kind, steady. He didn't raise his voice. He believed in slow mornings and afternoon walks. I didn't know how to trust someone like that at first. But he was patient. And I fell in love with that stability. I thought his mother would be the same. She wasn't. She was the queen of subtle sabotage. The kind who wouldn't yell, but would re-wash the dishes after you did them. The kind who'd say, "Of course," when you offered to help, but then sigh if you touched something the wrong way. She smiled, with her mouth, not her eyes. I knew she didn't think I was good enough. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I was not her. I hadn't grown up in their town. I hadn't gone to the right college. My family had no name, no lineage. I was a girl who made herself up from scratch. When we moved into her house to save money after Ethan's father died, I knew it was a risk. But Ethan insisted. "It's temporary," he said. "Just until we can buy our own place." But time passed. Years, actually. And slowly, I realized Ethan had no intention of moving. He liked the comfort, the familiarity. He liked the home-cooked meals and the yard he'd played in as a child. He liked that his mother handled the holidays. And so I waited. Then I got pregnant. And something shifted in me. Maybe it was hormones. Or maybe it was finally realizing that if I didn't carve out space for myself now, I never would. I didn't want my child to grow up thinking grandma made all the decisions, that she was the center of gravity. I didn't want to become a visitor in my own child's home. So I began to assert myself, subtly at first. I redecorated the nursery without asking for input. I changed the family calendar. I added new routines. I claimed mornings as mine. I knew Margaret, yes, I called her by her first name. In my head, didn't like it. But I didn't care. Then came the ring. I found it one day in the back of her closet while looking for a blanket for the baby. It was in a small wooden box with a velvet lining, an emerald set in gold. Beautiful. But what struck me was the note tucked underneath, for strength, to the one who remembers. I stared at it for a long time. At first I put it back. I didn't say a word. But something gnawed at me. Why wasn't this in a will? Why wasn't it passed down formally? Why was it hidden? The christening was coming up. A big family event. The baby was 6 months old. Ethan's side of the family was gathering, and I knew how these events went. Margaret would sit at the center. The guests would orbit her, and I would be Ethan's wife. So I wore the ring. I told everyone it had been left for the next generation. Technically, it had. The note said to the one who remembers, and I remembered everything. Every comment. Every time I was talked over. Every time I was made to feel second tier. It wasn't about the jewelry. It was about recognition. Power. I saw her face at the christening. The way she looked at my hand. I knew it hurt her. And part of me was sorry. But a louder part of me said, no one apologized when they erased you. After that, everything accelerated. I changed her room not to punish her, but because I needed the upstairs space for the new baby. The sunroom had better light anyway. She could still have her tea, her books. But the house needed to shift. For me. For my children. Ethan hesitated at first. But I reminded him of all the ways his mother had done enough. It was time for her to rest. To observe. To let go. Some nights I wondered if I was doing the right thing. Then I'd remember my own mother, how she destroyed everything she touched, and how I had to rebuild myself from the rubble. And I'd remember the promise I made when I got my first job, no one will ever control me again. Still I had doubts, until the day I saw Margaret looking through my laptop. She didn't say anything. But I knew, and I realized then she was collecting, observing me the way I had once observed her. Maybe she knew more than I thought. Maybe she wasn't as fragile as she let on. Maybe she was planning something too. That scared me, because in my world, planning equals threat. So yes, I began gathering my own materials. A preliminary inquiry about conservatorship. Nothing formal. Just information. Backups. In case she decided to claim I was abusing her or spreading lies. Ethan didn't want to go that far, but I told him this is how people protect themselves in families that don't talk. And then she brought Lisa into it. I saw them at the cafe. I saw the folder. I knew. I stood in the nursery that night, rocking the baby. I looked down at her small hands, her round face. She didn't know any of this. She didn't know the tug of war happening just down the hall. I whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. This house will be yours one day, just like Grandma wanted." Yes, I said Grandma. I wasn't talking about Margaret. I was talking about me. Maybe that was the moment I became something else. Not a daughter-in-law, not a mother, a replacement. Have you ever watched someone else control the story of your life and decided to take the pen back, no matter the cost? Do you think past pain justifies present control? Leave your thoughts in the comments. This is where the lines blur, and I know not everyone will agree with me, but I want to hear what you think, because now I've made my decision. The letter is gone. She won't find it, and I will end this before she even realizes what's coming. It was the envelope from the insurance company that finally pulled the thread. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Estate of Charles Callahan, my late husband. The name was printed in bold, the postmark recent. I had forwarded all estate-related matters years ago, yet somehow this piece had slipped through. Kristen must have missed it. I opened it, thinking it might be a notice or a policy lapse, something bureaucratic and dull. Instead, it was a receipt, a confirmation of beneficiary update processed 4 months ago. The policy had been switched to list Kristen as the primary point of contact for correspondence and document control. My name was no longer attached. I gripped the page, read it again. Charles had taken that policy out for both of us. He had always made sure I was taken care of. For Kristen to have touched it meant she had gone into files she had no right to access. The signature field was empty, just the notice that a digital submission had been made. I didn't confront her. I didn't speak. I waited. Because that same day, something else happened. I was walking through the neighborhood, trying to put space between myself and the suffocating walls of the sunroom, when I saw someone I hadn't expected. It was Mr. Barnes. He was walking his terrier Daisy, who barked twice before wagging her tail toward me. He smiled. "Margaret, it's been a while. How are you holding up?" I forced a smile, one day at a time. He looked concerned. "I was surprised to hear you were unwell. That's what Kristen told me last month when I brought over those old pictures from the block party." I paused. "What pictures?" "Oh, you didn't see them?" "No." He frowned and pulled out his phone. "Let me check." I emailed them to Kristen. She said you weren't checking email anymore, so she'd print them for you. But I never heard back. He opened his Gmail and scrolled. "Here. Sent on June 5th. He tapped. The email opened. There they were photos of Ethan, the kids, the neighbors, and one of me and my late husband, arm in arm, smiling under the summer canopy. Then I saw it. Attached was an audio file. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh," he chuckled. I'd forgotten that part. "It's from the video I took that day. There was a moment you and Charles were talking about the trust. It's mostly background noise, but kind of sweet. I thought you'd like it." He tapped play. At first it was muffled. Wind, laughter. Then clear as day my voice. "I don't want the kids arguing about the house, Charlie. Just make sure the trust says I stay here as long as I live. That's all I want." And his voice warm and steady I already did. "You stay here as long as you want. Nobody's changing that." I stared at the phone, heart pounding. "Could you send that to me?" I asked. He nodded. "Of course." When I returned home, I copied the file onto a flash drive and labeled it Trust Proof. Verbal. Then I printed the insurance letter and added it to the growing folder in my bag. That night, Kristen said nothing. She barely looked at me. The next morning, I went back to Mr. Barnes's house. He greeted me with coffee. "I've been thinking about that conversation yesterday," he said. "Something didn't sit right with me. Kristen told me last month you were, what's the word she used? Slipping. Said you'd confused her with your daughter once. Said you didn't recognize the baby." I clenched my jaw. "That never happened." He shook his head. "I didn't think so. But I didn't know what to say. I figured it was family stuff." "Well," I said, "now it's legal stuff." He paused. "Would it help if I wrote a statement about the email and what she said?" I blinked. "Would you really?" He nodded. "Absolutely." He wrote a paragraph, signed it, and printed the email log with the audio attachment date. I thanked him and walked home with my heart thudding, because now I had something Kristen couldn't erase. She could argue with memory. She could rewrite schedules, doctor's notes, even Ethan's perception. But she couldn't delete the voice of a man no longer alive. She couldn't silence the proof of a third party. Have you ever had someone outside your family witness something no one else would believe? Did their truth change anything? Or did it just confirm your own reality? Please share your story in the comments. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly aren't even part of our circle. Later that evening, I gathered all the evidence, the insurance update, the court inquiry forms, the voicemail about Dr. Patel, the printed court search, the photo of the conservatorship browser history, the flash drive with Charles's voice, and now Mr. Barnes's signed statement. I called Lisa. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "Bring someone, not Ethan." "Who?" "Someone who doesn't owe Kristen anything." She brought her friend Dana, a lawyer, who specialized in elder protection. We met in a quiet corner of the community center. Dana reviewed every item carefully. Her brow furrowed deeper with each page. "This is serious," she said at last. "You need legal protection." "I'm not filing anything yet," I said. "But I want her to know I'm not the victim she thinks I am." Dana nodded. "Understood. But I would suggest you secure the originals and make 2 backup copies." "I already did." She smiled. "Then you're 10 steps ahead." That evening, I returned home, just as Kristen was leaving for her prenatal checkup. She didn't say goodbye, but I noticed the laptop screen still open on the kitchen island. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. An email sat in drafts. "To Ethan, subject emergency meeting. Medical intervention body, we need to discuss immediate options. Her behavior is becoming erratic." I caught her talking to herself in the attic again. "We can't wait. If you don't act, I will." I didn't touch it. I didn't delete it. I simply took a picture. Because now I wasn't alone. I had people. I had proof. And I had something Kristen didn't expect. Resolve. The next morning, I booked an appointment with someone I hadn't seen since the funeral. Charles's lawyer. Because Kristen wasn't the only one preparing her case. Now it was my turn. I chose the setting carefully. It couldn't be too formal. Kristen thrived in controlled environments. Doctors' offices, private texts, hushed conversations. She was powerful in the shadows. No, I needed light. I needed witnesses. I needed a place where silence would be impossible. Ethan's birthday provided the perfect opportunity. Kristen planned a brunch, of course. She chose the location, our backyard, under the pergola my husband built the year Ethan graduated college. She ordered custom pastries and rented folding chairs. The guest list included neighbors, cousins, a few of Ethan's co-workers, and most importantly, Lisa. I wore the pale blue blouse Charles had loved. I pinned my hair back simply and wore no jewelry, not even my wedding ring. I didn't need symbols anymore. I had the truth. Kristen was all smiles that morning, fluttering around the setup like a hostess on television. She looked tired beneath her makeup, but she held it together. She had to. Today was about Ethan, or so she thought. I waited until the meal had been served, until the mimosas had been poured, until people began to lean back in their chairs and dab at their lips with cloth napkins. Then I stood up. I'd like to say a few words, I said. There was a polite pause. A few guests smiled. Ethan looked startled, but nodded. Kristen stiffened. I walked to the edge of the patio, facing the gathering. First of all, I said, "Thank you for being here. Some of you have known this family for years. Some are new. But all of you are witnessing something very important today." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and gestured toward the Bluetooth speaker Kristen had used to play soft jazz. Lisa had helped me set this up earlier. One click. Charles's voice filled the air. "I already did. You stay here as long as you want. Nobody's changing that." There was silence. Then a few murmurs. I looked directly at Ethan. That was Dad. He made it clear this house was my home until I chose to leave. But recently, someone else has been making those choices for me. Kristen stood up. "Margaret, what is this?" "I'm not finished." I pulled the insurance letter from my bag. Someone submitted a request to change my late husband's life insurance policy, replacing me as point of contact. I showed the page. Someone also attempted to arrange a conservatorship without my knowledge. Gasps now. Ethan looked at Kristen. "Is that true?" Kristen's face was white. She's twisting things. "I have a voicemail," I said, "from you, Kristen, telling Ethan to delete messages about medical reports so the court would think they came from a doctor." I pressed play. Her voice spilled out. "Just remember to ask Dr. Patel if she'll sign the report herself." A man sitting in the back stood up. "You forged a doctor's report." "I didn't forge anything," Kristen snapped. "This is being blown out of proportion. You're not hearing the context." I held up my hand. "There's more." "But that's not the point." I turned to the guests. "The point is, I was being erased from my home, from my family, bit by bit, politely, legally, but completely." I looked around the table. Many of you probably thought I was fading, that I was tired, confused, maybe even ill. That's the story Kristen told. But none of you ever asked me directly. Not once. There was shame now. Eyes darted away. Fortunately, I continued, someone outside the family did notice. Mr. Barnes stood up slowly from the side where he had been sipping lemonade. I sent an email to Kristen with a recording from last summer. She said Margaret didn't check email anymore, but she never passed it on. He looked at Kristen. "You lied to me about her, about what she said. I have a signed statement if anyone would like to see it." Kristen's voice cracked. "You people don't understand. She's been watching me, sneaking around. She's not, well, you're all being manipulated. She has recordings," someone whispered. "Court papers," said another. Kristen turned to Ethan. "Say something." But he didn't. He was staring at the table, his hands clenched, his face pale. "Ethan," she said again, "you know what we talked about. You know how confused she's been. You told me." "I told you I was worried," he said quietly. "I didn't tell you to do all this. You didn't stop me either." That landed like a slap. Lisa stood. "I warned you, Kristen. You crossed the line." Kristen's breath was rapid now. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for support. No one spoke. The silence was deafening. "If you were there," I said to the crowd, my voice shaking, but clear, "if you saw someone slowly dismantling another person's identity, whose side would you take?" I'm not asking you to fight. I'm just asking you to look, really look. And if you think this was okay, say it. But if you don't say that too, say it in the comments below. Because this happens more than people think. And most of the time, no one says a word. Kristen picked up her purse. "I'm leaving." Ethan didn't follow. She walked out alone. After she was gone, no one rushed to fill her chair. The air changed. People started asking questions. Someone came up to me and said, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I smiled sadly, because no one wanted to hear it. That night, the family stayed quiet. Lisa stayed over. Ethan slept in the guest room. I stayed in my sunroom. For once, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like waiting. Because despite what had just happened, I knew the final twist still hadn't come. 3 days after the brunch, I walked into the law office of James Thatcher, my husband's former estate attorney. The building hadn't changed, still lined with oil paintings, still smelled faintly of tobacco and old carpet. But the receptionist was new, young, and wary when she saw me. "I'm here to see Mr. Thatcher," I said. She nodded. "You have an appointment? He'll remember me. Margaret Callahan." He did. Within minutes, I was in his office sitting across from a man who once helped Charles and me draft our will, our trust, and every detail of our estate plan. He had aged since the last time I saw him, heavier, slower, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Margaret," he said, settling into his leather chair. "You look tired." I pulled the flash drive from my purse. "I've been fighting to stay visible in my own life, and now I need your help to make it official." I laid out the folder. Every document, every photo, every printed email, Mr. Barnes's statement, the audio from Charles, the court inquiry, the revised insurance letter, the voicemail about the fake medical report, the photo of the conservatorship draft. Kristen's unsigned email to Ethan accusing me of being unstable. Thatcher read in silence. Occasionally he muttered under his breath. "Do you still have the original trust agreement?" he asked. "I do. In the bank's lockbox with your stamp." He smiled faintly. "Good. That means we can enforce the original language and potentially challenge any unauthorized changes." Then I asked the question I had rehearsed in my mind all week. "Can I take legal action under California's elder abuse statutes?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a thick binder from the shelf behind him, flipped a few pages, and read aloud. "Under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Paragraph 156.07. Elder abuse includes financial abuse, neglect, abandonment, isolation, abduction, or other treatment resulting in physical harm or mental suffering." He looked up. "You're over 65. You live in California. And you have clear documentation of isolation, coercion, attempted removal of control over your affairs, and financial manipulation." "Yes." "This falls under elder abuse." A weight left my shoulders. It was the first time someone had said it aloud, not just bad behavior, not family drama, abuse. "But if we do this," he said, "you must be prepared. Kristen will fight. She may file her own claims. She may turn your son against you again." I nodded. "She already has." We filed the complaint that afternoon. It wasn't a criminal case yet, but a civil petition to the Superior Court for elder financial abuse and undue influence under California's Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act. Within 48 hours, Kristen was served with a protective order, barring her from altering any legal or financial documents related to me, my estate, or the property I lived in. She was also summoned for a hearing. The morning of the court date, I wore navy. Lisa came with me. Ethan didn't. Kristen arrived alone, wearing a beige pantsuit and trembling just beneath the surface. She barely looked at me as she sat across the aisle. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just us, the attorneys, and a bailiff with a sleepy expression. The judge, a woman in her 60s, called us forward. Thatcher stood and began. He laid out everything: the false conservatorship inquiry, the unauthorized insurance transfer, the digital document trail, the isolation, the statements from neighbors, the removal of photos, the restricted access to my medical records, the voicemail, and finally the recording of Charles's voice affirming my right to remain in the house. The judge listened, unflinching, silent. Then Kristen's lawyer, a young man with a nervous smile, tried to paint the picture of concern. He said Kristen had simply been worried about my well-being, that she only wanted to help, that nothing she did was malicious. The judge held up a sheet of paper. "This email," she said, "the one drafted but unsent, says, 'If you don't act, I will.' That does not suggest concern. That suggests threat." Kristen's lawyer tried to object, but the judge held up a hand. Then Thatcher spoke again. His voice was calm. I'll never forget what he said. "Your Honor, my client isn't trying to punish her daughter-in-law. She's simply trying to reclaim her identity, her autonomy, her voice. That's not revenge. That's justice. The judge turned to Kristen. Mrs. Callahan, this court finds that your conduct meets the threshold of financial manipulation and psychological isolation under the California Elder Abuse Statute. You are hereby barred from engaging in any estate-related decisions or medical representation for Margaret Callahan. Furthermore, a formal review of the attempted conservatorship petition will be opened. Kristen went pale. But she's making this sound worse than it was. The judge didn't blink. Ma'am, you don't get to write the narrative anymore. I looked down at my hands. For the first time in months, they weren't trembling. After the hearing, Thatcher walked me to the elevator. You just changed the game, he said quietly. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. On the ride home, Lisa asked if I wanted to celebrate. I shook my head. I just want my garden back, I said. And to hold my granddaughter again, without asking permission. That evening, Kristen didn't come home. She didn't call. She didn't message Ethan. She didn't leave a note. But her car was gone. And so was the ring. Maybe she finally realized the legacy she tried to steal wasn't hers to wear. Have you ever seen justice served not in handcuffs or revenge, but in the form of someone reclaiming their name? Do you think this judgment is enough, or should there be more? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your verdict too. But even as the house settled into a heavy silence, I knew one final chapter remained, because Kristen had left something behind. And it wasn't the ring. The silence after Kristen's departure was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. For the first time in years, the house wasn't filled with her voice, her instructions, her schedule, her curated calm. And yet, for several days, I found myself walking carefully, as if she might still emerge from a hallway and say, "What are you doing in here?" But the hallway was empty. The tension clinging to the walls began to fall away, like old dust disturbed by wind. Ethan barely spoke for the first few days. He walked around the house with slumped shoulders, like someone trying to understand the shape of a story he'd been too distracted to read until it had already reached the end. One night, I passed by the guest room and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at an old family photo, one that had mysteriously disappeared months ago and was now back on the shelf. Lisa had helped me put it there. When I finally sat down with him, he looked at me and said only one thing: "I'm sorry." And I nodded. Because some things didn't need a lecture, only a reckoning. But I didn't want to dwell there. I didn't want the end of the story to be about pain, or betrayal, or even justice. I wanted it to be about something else. So I stood in the garden, my garden. The weeds had crept into the flower beds, like quiet invaders, tangling around the hydrangeas, choking the soil where my husband and I once spent Sunday mornings in rubber boots, sipping coffee between pruning sessions. I took a deep breath, and I started again. It began with my hands in the dirt. Then came the small clay pots on the windowsill. Then a call to the community center. Then a flyer. Gardening for grandmothers. Saturdays at 10 a.m., free soil, free seeds, free coffee. 5 women showed up the first week, 11 the next. Soon the group expanded. We shared clippings, stories, recipes, tears. Some had been widowed, others estranged, many simply forgotten. We laughed over dead begonias and cried over letters never sent. And without meaning to, I became something I had nearly forgotten how to be: present. One afternoon during our 3rd week, a woman named Helen, quiet reserved, always wore a floral scarf, stayed behind as the others packed up. She turned to me and said, "You don't know what this means to me. I haven't felt like I mattered in a long time." I smiled gently. Me too. Word spread. Someone asked if we could record a few sessions. I agreed. Lisa, watching me from the porch, grinned. "You've gone viral, Mum. Gardening grandma with a spine of steel." I laughed. That's not the headline I was expecting, but it felt good. Not glamorous, not triumphant, but rooted. Ethan started spending more time outside. He helped fix the irrigation system I once begged Kristen to use. He brought the baby my granddaughter out to sit with us on a blanket as I planted basil and rosemary. And one day, without prompting, he handed me something, a small velvet box. Inside was the ring. I found it in the glove compartment, he said softly. She didn't take it with her. Maybe she knew. I held it for a moment. Then I closed the box and set it aside. Will you give it to your daughter one day? He asked. I smiled. Only when she understands where it came from. Have you ever watched someone fall and not crumble? Have you seen someone rise, not in revenge, but in rediscovery? I'd love to hear your story. If someone in your life turned their pain into power, share it in the comments. You never know who you might inspire today. Weeks passed, then months. On my 76th birthday, Lisa and Ethan threw a small party. Just family. No catered brunch. No photographers. Just home-cooked food, a garden full of life, and one very messy chocolate cake with candles that wouldn't stay lit. After dinner, Lisa handed me a leather-bound notebook. Inside were letters. From my granddaughter, from Lisa, from neighbors, even from Mr. Barnes. Words like resilient, brave, unmovable, soft, but sharp. Words I hadn't dared associate with myself in years. And taped to the inside cover was a note from Ethan. Thank you for not leaving. Thank you for standing when I sat in silence. I didn't cry that night. I planted lavender instead. I didn't win anything, but I reclaimed everything. If you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in emotion, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many voices out there that deserve to be heard, and so many stories still waiting to bloom.